Well, welcome back into the gardener's cottage garden here in Blakeney in Norfolk. We were over here on a Friday morning just doing our normal tidying up, a little bit of gardening, just cutting back and generally just going over the garden, deadheading, so that this garden stays in flower for the guests through the rest of August, which can be a tricky time in the garden here in Norfolk. It's quite often extremely droughted and we spend most of our time deadheading. Not this year, however. Everything's had a good drenching very regularly throughout the season, and we've got lots of flower bud coming on and lots of flowers still in the garden, including this rather gorgeous rose, which is absolutely now in the middle of August covered in bud again and really going to give a good second flush. What haven't done quite so well this year compared to last is the climbing icebergs on the flint walls. These would normally be back in bud now. We did give them a good deadhead earlier in the season, but there's very little to see on those, not suiting them this year. Japanese anemones really coming on nicely. See the seed heads from the honesty being allowed to mature in the background there. Still got some hollyhock flower here in Blakeney. We will be doing a village tour later on this afternoon, just going down the lokes and seeing what Blakeney is very famous for, which is all the lokes filled with these hollyhocks. Buddleias still just coming to the end of their season here, but the patio looking very nice indeed. Predominantly colour at the moment coming from the agapanthus in pots and the phlox on that back wall. Let's go and have a look at those in more detail now. Again, these looking really nice at this time of year. We've usually had to struggle to keep these from drying out. They're in a very dry little raised bed just behind this retaining wall, but this year absolutely beautiful display, and these should keep flowering now right the way through into September. Got a second little flush on this small rambling rose just coming to the end of its flowering period. The agapanthus that we grow here in pots so we can move them around into the sunny positions, just coming to their best this time of year here in Blakeney. This large headed blue variety looking to do its thing over the next couple of weeks. Still plenty of colour to come on, whereas this tall white's been out now in flower for around a fortnight and just coming to the end of its flowering season. We've had to pick quite a few of the flower heads off this with the heavy rain and windy weather we've been having. They have been prone to falling over, and you can see just a couple on the floor there. Once they've gone over like that, unless you've staked these and tied them up, there's no getting them back up. But they do quite well as a cut flower, and we like to take those in and just put them in the vase for the guests arriving later this afternoon, so they'll be tidied up for them and looking very nice later on. I've shown you the Japanese anemones in this pot multiple times, but they do just love it. It's a west-facing border with quite a tall shrub behind it. It's not a shrub really, it's a tree, isn't it? It's a prunus that. Flowers very early in the spring, but it's very dark and gives a black drop to this part of the garden, which means these keep their roots in shade, and this is a pretty moist part of this garden, if there is a moist part of this garden. This year there certainly has been, but these just love it here. Kate will show you how to deadhead these to keep them in flower for the rest of the season, but we should have flower on these right the way up to the first frosts, and they are spreading out marvellously by root runners. Once you get Japanese anemones established, this is what tends to happen. You'll get little plants coming up around the outer side, and within a year or so they're to flowering size as this one is. Great way to propagate these plants is just to break the root division, dig these up, pot them and grow them on, or plant them out in the new position that you want these. Going to be a hybrid variety, this one, not short of the original variety or name, not a double, but it does flower profusely. Just opposite we have got a double showing. Again, haven't kept the names of these I'm afraid, but this semi-double form, much less vigorous in its growth here, different position slightly, which may explain that. In a very dry rain shadow, this just to the side of the house, facing in an entirely opposite direction. This is east facing and gets the sun first thing in the morning. Growing slightly taller, this one, because I think mainly of the lack of light. It's flowering at around 3.5 to 4 feet, but a very beautiful deeper pink with those beautiful central rosettes of yellow. A nice Japanese anemone, which is hopefully going to spread out along this border, and if it does come up on the other side of the retaining wall, again, a division opportunity there for these plants. Last little thing to share with you this morning, these beautiful seed heads. Just look at these bright orange honeysuckle seeds. Don't get these every year on this variety. This is a late Dutch honeysuckle, just a little bit of the flower left on it. Scents was absolutely beautiful along here about a month ago, but now the colour and displays all coming from the seeds, growing up through into the crab apple, which has got a good crop of crabs on. I did a video a couple of weeks ago on our eating apple crop, which is looking pretty miserable over in mid Norfolk, but the earlier flowering crab apples have set well, and that looks as if it should give a display of good red crabs later in the season. But right now it's all about this little burst of colour against the dark ivy backdrop on this west facing wall. So plenty to do tidying up wise, cutting back, and generally just a bit of maintenance here in the garden and the cottage before the next set of guests come in at around 4 o'clock this afternoon.